it seems like kind of a strange season initially, and it takes me a little while to kind of get into it and to even understand what it's about. For most of us, Advent involves Advent wreaths, going out behind your Christmas tree, maybe an Advent calendar. It's a time for Christmas songs and going to parties and buying presents. Now, did you notice the stark contrast between that kind of fun, superficial approach to Advent and today's gospel? Today's gospel is just so intense. It's so strange and filled with strange images, and it's such a contrast to the way we go about Advent. Think about it. It mentions signs in the sun, the moon and the stars, turmoil in the ocean, the powers of heaven being shaken, the Son of Man coming on clouds in glory. What are these images about? And what do they have to do with us and with Advent, with Christ coming into our world? Well, I want to suggest to you this morning that if we can kind of get into the meaning of these Jewish images, we will discover that Advent and our Christian faith is about so much more than we often realize. Now, when Jesus speaks about signs in the sun and the moon and the powers of heaven being shaken, he's borrowing images from Isaiah chapter 13. And in Isaiah chapter 13, those images are meant to say something powerful to us. They tell us that our Christian faith is about a cosmic battle with evil. When Jesus comes into the world and begins his ministry in Galilee, he is involved in a battle with the forces of evil. He is seeking to drive out all social and cultural forces that dehumanize us and destroy God's creation. And he began this work when he was driving out demons, when he was healing people and forgiving people. And he continues this work today, working through us to drive out the forces of greed and brutality, racism, hatred, and violence. And one day, we believe this cosmic battle will come to an end when Jesus will have banished all the destructive forces from creation, and our world will be filled with God's peace and justice and love. I told you that Advent is about a lot more than we normally realize. It's intense. But we can go a little bit further. At the end of today's gospel, Jesus tells us to pray to be able to handle the tribulations. Pray to be able to handle the struggles and difficulties of life. And here's why he tells us that. He knows that we live between his first coming and his final appearance. We live between the age of hostility and injustice and that future age of God's peace and justice. We're in the middle of these two. And Advent is the season that reminds us of this. All the major figures that show up in Advent, John the Baptist, Mary, all these readings that we'll hear this month, remind us that we live between these times. And it's good news because it means the power of God is coming to us through Christ and the Spirit. But it's bad news because all of those destructive forces are still alive and well. So, we have recently witnessed an experience of this. We've seen what it's like when the forces of hostility and hate are active. When they are alive and well, 3 white men can shoot and kill another person for jogging while black. And 2 prosecutors can think there's no case here. we're not going to bring this up at all. Except for the videotape, the Ahmaud Arbery case would never have gone to trial. And everybody held their breath when that jury was deliberating. Why? Because white juries in the South always acquit white people of killing people of color. They always do. But for a moment, our country witnessed the light and justice of God's kingdom breaking into our dark world as a majority white jury in Georgia convicted 3 white men of murder. For a moment, we had an Advent experience of the peace and justice and truth of God breaking into our dark world. Now, an innocent man is still dead. His mother will not see him again in this life. But for a moment, God's kingdom came into this world. So you see, Advent reminds us that we wait in hope for the full realization of God's justice and peace on earth. And when Jesus does finally appear, this doesn't mean, as some people seem to think, that creation will be gone, that God will destroy everything. No. That's not what this means. It means the end of a world ruled by hatred and violence and corruption and greed, and the creation of God's new world. And at the center of this new world that we hope for stands the risen Jesus in all his glory and beauty. It is around him that we will gather with all of our loved ones in joy. It's around him that all the hopes of our world will be realized finally. And then the beauty and life of God will flood every home and flower and mountain and star and person. And it really will be a new creation. I told you the gospel is about a lot more than we normally realize. Now, what are we to do in the meantime as we live between the beginning of Christ's coming and his full realization? Well, today in the second reading, Paul's letter to the Thessalonians, he gives us some guidance as to what we should be doing in the meantime. How we can live in a world that seems to be opposed to God's kingdom. Here's what he tells us. Paul says, increase and abound in love for each other and all. And notice Paul says increase. He already assumes that we are people of faith and hope and love. He's saying increase it, level it up. Go to the next level with your love. And notice he says, increase and abound in your love for each other, those in the parish, your friends and family. But then he says, and all. And he's saying to the Thessalonians, that means all of your pagan neighbors. And for us, for all people. You see, love is not a feeling for the New Testament writers, for Paul. Love is an action that places the needs of the other first. It means acting on behalf of those in need. It means accompanying people, being with them, supporting them, listening to them. And you know, every time we love as Christ loves, we are reminding the world that Christ's future world is coming. Every time we feed the hungry, every time we accompany and support and console the hurt and lonely, we give them a taste of Christ's presence to come. So let's get to work, my friends. Happy Advent.